Good evening, everyone. Uh, s- uh, I apologize me for, sorry, I have to take apologies for my bad throat, but I thought it's time for me to come and spend some time and talk about an interesting topic. I'm sure throughout the day you have had interesting sessions, but what I'll try to do is spend next couple of minutes in talking about what is generative AI, and I'm sure most of you have been using ChatGPT, so it's not a new topic for you. But let me spend some time giving you a perspective on what generative AI is and how the technology can be leveraged by enterprises, right? So what we'll do, look at us. Okay, great. So show of hands, how many of you have used ChatGPT? Almost 85-90% of you have actually used ChatGPT. How many of you moved beyond ChatGPT? Let's say used a DAL-E or a Midjourney. Okay, and the main purpose of using ChatGPT, I'm sure, would be for writing emails, writing poems. Yeah. So I think what has happened is in 2023, maybe late 2022, when the technology came out, I think GPT has been there in existence for a while, but I think it suddenly started catching attention of the industry, catching attention of people, because it started throwing out what you call as interesting stuff, right? It started creating. What you started encountering was a new artist who was talking about, or which was really creating a lot of information basis the past learnings, right? And imagine ChatGPT is like or a generative AI technology is like a DJ, right? A DJ which understands music, which understands text, and is just trying to bring everything together and trying to create contextual and context-sensitive information, right? Uh, and I'm sure most of you have actually seen artificial intelligence technology, which has been there for a while. I think almost half a decade, not half a decade, half a century. And I think what has happened is generative AI actually is the next subset of the regular artificial intelligence that you have seen in the past. So some of the rock stars that you have seen so far, as I said, ChatGPT, you must have heard about Mistral, you must have heard about DALI. There are more models that are coming practically every day, right? And these models are being created by, organizations, created by companies which are trying to create specific large language models or generative AI capabilities for addressing specific domain related issues. Uh, Okay, so as I said, why you want to use generative AI? You want to use generative AI because you wanted to write memes, possibly when ChatGPT came for the first time. You wanted to write an email, you started using ChatGPT, right? You wanted to write, in fact, it's a joke in most of the organizations. So earlier, the leave letter that used to come to you for approvals would be one liner saying that you want to go on leave, right? Now there's a big paragraph and there's a big, sentimental email that you'll start receiving, right? Saying that why you want to go on a leave. So I think what has happened is it has really enabled people to create information or create content without much of an effort. There's always a starting point. So the starting point in the past was you had to really think and start putting it together. If I had to just take a step back, uh, the very idea of knowledge acquisition was in the past was you had to go through, let's say, encyclopedias, you had to read books, frame your own, with basis your own understanding, you have to frame your own, knowledge and put it down. Then came Google. You started searching for information, looked at 10 different sites, and then you started framing your understanding and then putting it together, right? Then came generative AI. You didn't have to do all of that. You just had to put your question, you just had to put your basic prompts, and information came. And generative AI actually looked at hundreds, thousands of sites and it created information for you. So the very idea of knowledge acquisition has collapsed, right? I think that's what generative AI has done, right? It has started acquiring as much of a knowledge, and possibly it may not have acquired information which is not available publicly, but anything that is available on the internet, it has acquired and created a source of information where you don't need to put efforts to acquire that knowledge and put it together, right? So if you really see the potential of the generative AI, what we are seeing is more than 80% of the enterprises in future will be looking at generative AI as per Gartner survey, and the potential addition to the economy, we are talking about almost 4.4 trillion dollars of worth of economy addition that's going to happen in future. So what are the various use cases of generative AI, right? One is, we just talked about the automated content generation. The other piece is enhanced customer interaction. So I'm sure most of you have experienced the recent chatbots that have been introduced by some of the customer-facing organizations. Earlier, it used to be very FAQ centric, right? So you would ask a question, there would be a response. It was very canned response kind of a model that people were running. Now, considering the capabilities of ChatGPT or similar models that are powering these chats, the understanding of a problem statement of a customer and responding back onto that has become very easy, right? So I think it's able to frame better. The response is coming much better. The response is coming more customized. So I think what's happening is the very idea of customer service is changing using generative AI, right? The third thing, which is around data analysis, right? So most of the data in the past, it used to be labeled. So I'm sure most of you have experienced, especially if you have worked on artificial intelligence projects. You would have to label the project, you have to clean the project, you have to label the data, you have to clean the data and train the models. But with generative AI, you could potentially push the data straight to the model. The model will be able to correlate the information and give you the output. So what has happened is the power of predicting information, predicting outcomes is much more faster without much of a work, especially cleaning of the data. Fourth is, this is an interesting use case where a cosmetic company decided to come out with a new formula for a beauty product, right? And this was done basis customer preferences, depending on the demographics that the company was operating in, the country it was operating in, the type of skin, the skincare products the company was producing, and the type of customers they were trying to address. Considering all these parameters, considering the feedbacks of the customer, considering various other inputs that came from the from different other products, they designed a new product using generative AI. And they didn't have to go through a lot of this. Obviously, they had to go test some of the product features, I mean, whether the efficacy of the product. But this wasn't very difficult because all this information could be brought in together by a generative AI model, and it could create a product, right? Some good examples is of generative AI is healthcare, right? You look at um, leveraging a lot of information that exists today in healthcare industry. You could have prescriptions coming from doctors, you have diagnostics. All that information can be understood by generative AI models, and you could actually come up with possibly better diagnosis of a particular issue, right, or a particular problem with a patient, right? The other thing which we have seen, and most of us have actually leveraged, is the content creation, right, especially in the media. So if a journalist wanted to write something in the past, he or she had to, as I said, put all the thoughts together properly and then enhance it over a period of time. Now with generative AI, you have a starting point. You could just pass on some prompts. It gives you a structure. You can fine tune that and then get the article out very quickly. And this has gone beyond writing. It's gone to music. It's gone to video. And I'm sure you must have seen deepfakes, which is again media content created by generative AI, right? So all this is good. All this is good. You had nice poems, nice articles, nice analysis being done by generative AI. All that is going good. But what's the dark side of generative AI, right? I think we've been extensively talking about generative AI, using it, but we haven't really looked at what could be the negative side of generative AI. One, AI has been used by not really good folks as well to create personalized messages, right? I'm sure some of you may have experienced this. The CEO of a company will send a message to the employee saying that I'm in need of money. Can you send me some money, or maybe buy me some Amazon vouchers, right? Something like that. And these messages have been personalized by generative AI technology. If you have not experienced this, I think I have seen some cases with some of my colleagues, right? Especially in the industry. Another important case that came up, right, and that kind of opened up and in fact it alerted the whole industry when one of the employees of Samsung had put the code, which is their own private code, onto ChatGPT. ChatGPT, obviously, it's acquiring knowledge. It's acquiring knowledge from whatever you're putting together. Basis that all the code was flushed out, right, and it was absorbed by the LLM, and there was a massive leakage, right. So what has happened is some of these examples have created, there are negative sides of generative AI which people haven't really understood, right. And another one was an AI meal planner, right. Somebody said, I want to create, can you plan a meal for me? And it actually gave, very disturbing recipes, right? Disturbing recipes on what can potentially harm human beings, right? So it doesn't understand, it doesn't have the sentiments of, or it doesn't have the basic, I would say common sense, if I may call it, but it understands that how do I just bring all the information together and give you an output, which looks very realistic, may or may not be right, right? So what are the various concerns of Gen AI? One, ethics is a bigger problem. Bias could be a bigger problem. Imagine this information which is taken over by, or let's say understood by Gen AI, and basis which it is giving you a response is based on certain content which was already biased, right? You may say that a person who is tall or a female should be, let's say, I'm just taking an example, should be paid less. If the generative AI has gone through a lot of content like that, it will always recommend you that a female should be paid less, right? So this is the bias that obviously that has got created, that can be created. There can be adversary attacks as also on the data, right? So if the Gen AI is getting trained on certain data and there are adversaries which come and attack the data and put negative information, imagine if this becomes, and imagine a use case where you have sensitive, decisions to be taken. In such a case, if there is an adversary which comes and poisons the data, obviously the response will be negative. So those are the scenarios where you have a challenge, especially related to ethics and bias. Third thing is data privacy. We did talk about Samsung issue. There are cases where people put their personal information into ChatGPT or any of the models that they're training, and it can potentially leak. So as an example, somebody says my phone number is this, my personal information is this, my preferences are these. And if the information is trained, if the information is pushed to generative AI, it can potentially start throwing out that information to a larger number of people, right? And responses can be inaccurate. I'm sure you must have heard about hallucination in Gen AI. This is basically when you try to ask a question to Gen AI model, it gives you a response, and after a point, it starts giving you a response if you try to keep tweaking the model, right? If you start prompting the model in such a way that it is it is unable to understand what you're asking, but it will try to cook some information, cook some answer and give it to you. That's called hallucination. So it can be completely inaccurate because it doesn't understand beyond a point what you're trying to ask, right? So if you've understood so far the good part of the AI, the bad part of the AI, you still want to get onto a Gen AI journey, I think there are various things that you need to look at. One, I am sure many of you have tried. How many of you actually, show of hands, how many of you have actually tried leveraging Gen AI in your organizations? Couple few, right? I think maybe I can see only 5% maybe. If you're trying to leverage Gen AI in your organization, couple of things that you need to look at. One, evaluate the readiness of your organization. Whether you really want to bring Gen AI in your organization, whether there's a use case to solve in your organization. Identify the high impact use cases. You just can't say that I'm having a technology, I'm trying to take a lead, and I want to go to my business and I want to solve the problem, which does not exist, right? So identify use cases where you can put in your money on Gen AI and try to solve those problems. Understand the ethical issues and regulatory issues. You could be in a business which could be banking, healthcare, and let's say if you are in healthcare and you are trying to solve a problem using Gen AI, and we did talk about the issues related to healthcare where a wrong decision by the model can potentially put an individual at risk, right? It could be a life and death situation. So identify the regulatory risks and the other issues that could potentially come in through wrong decision and biases that the model can give you, right? Some of the technical considerations that you should look at is the data that you have. If you have data that you're trying to use and it may not be relevant for training the models, it won't really help you. So you need to have the right use case, you need to have the right data, you need to have the right quantity of data to train the model. It cannot be trained on partial information. It will always give you wrong information. The other thing that happens is when you try to train your models real time, the model can get distorted, right? So you train the model based on a certain set of data, then again you push another data point, it can get distorted. So what happens is always train your models in a batch mode so that it becomes much more precise when it's trying to give you information. The second thing is Gen AI models are very resource hungry, right? So we did attempt in our organization to use, let's say, cloud-based platforms. We did attempt using on-premise infrastructure. What happens is some of these large language models, if you're trying to use, let's say, a GPT-4 or you're trying to use, let's say, a small language model, some of these models can be put on-premise, but they need very high compute power. If you're trying to run it on cloud, it requires high compute power, and that's the reason they become expensive. The compute power is required because you're already trying to run a language model which is learned on a lot of parameters. As an example, GPT-4 is trained on 174 or 175 billion parameters. A smaller language model could be between 2 billion parameters to, let's say, 8 billion parameters. So I think that's the kind of range that is available, but when you're trying to load these models onto infrastructure, it could be very demanding, right? And the most important part is, where do you get this information? And there has to be a feedback loop. So you have to also do the integration with your existing systems, right? Operational considerations, you may want to bring the technology, you have use cases. The biggest problem that I've seen, skill gaps, right? So you do not have people who can come and actually implement for you. So you have to find the right partnerships. You may have to train your own people to start, if they understand AI, maybe upskill themselves to generative AI and start developing some of those use cases, right? The other part is change management and adoption. Sometimes it may feel for users that you're trying to bring in a change which may be displacing their jobs, right? I think you have to have that communication in the organization, because the Gen AI may not be able to disrupt, but with the fear of disruption will disrupt the organization. So I think you need to manage the change very effectively. And also, as I said, you have to manage the whole feedback loop, right? So there's always a constant learning. So you have to manage the feedback loop very efficiently. So where do you start, right? You start, as I said, not every model is suitable for every organization. It's like, if I have to teach my younger son who is in primary, I could get a primary teacher or I could get a Harvard professor. What is efficient, right? A Harvard professor may not be efficient for me because it's expensive and it may not really do my purpose, but I can get a primary teacher, which is a small language model, right, in context of a generative AI. So get the right model in place, get the right infrastructure in place, get the data in place, and train the models, right? That's the first part. Second thing is, as I said, generative AI models hallucinate, right? They hallucinate because they do not understand beyond a point what you're trying to ask. So what you can do is you can train those models by and possibly fine tune those models using RAG. RAG is retrieval, and I'm sure most of you or any of you who come from consulting or organizations which follow RAG, which is red, amber, green. It's not that. It's retrieval, augment, and generate. It's a technology or it's a terminology used in Gen AI. Primarily focusing on training the models on specific content, right? This could be, let's say you are a healthcare company, or it could be let's say bank, right? What you could do is you can bring a model, train the model completely on banking domain, right? Banking risk, banking, terminologies, and possibly everything to do with banking, right? You could be from a manufacturing, so train the model, everything to do with that manufacturing of a specific set of products. What will happen is when you ask a query or when you prompt the model, what it will do is it will try to go look for information first in the training data that you have given, and it will not go beyond that, right? So that's the way you can use RAG, and you can restrict the hallucination. Second thing that you can do is, you can possibly get the information that you want to train the model, and as I said, you can leverage the small language model. If you're trying, let's say you're trying to create a chatbot, right? So get models which are fine tuned for that kind of a use case. So if you're trying to get a chat GPT or let's say GPT-4 and you're trying to build a bot, it may be overqualified for that job. So get as an example Lambda, which is a Google model for chatbots, right? For sentiment analysis, get a chat GPT-4 or let's say GPT-4 kind of a model. So these are the various use case driven things that you could potentially look at, especially when you're choosing the right models, right? So the next thing is, do you want to build the models or you want to buy the models, right? Build, as I said, you can download open source models from Hugging Face, put on premise, train them, etc. It's fine. Or you can buy the models directly from some of the hyperscalers. Those are available, APIs are available, push your data. The good part is some of these hyperscalers also help you draw boundaries around the model. So what I was mentioning earlier, a Samsung engineer pushed the code onto ChatGPT and the code was public. But what you could do is create your own private instance on hyperscalers and run that information, train the models, make sure that the information doesn't go out, right? So it's only one-way street. The information can come from outside, but it doesn't go out. It doesn't go outside, right? So that's the way you look at from a training perspective, right? And most importantly, as I said, these are expensive models, right? So they're not cheap to run. While we may say that $20 subscription will work, but you're using publicly available APIs. Privately, if you want to run, they're really expensive. So you have to be also very sure what you want to run, right? SLM, LLM, which model. So you have to be very specific in terms of what you want to run. So looking at the future, I think Gen AI is going to be here. It's going to be here to stay, right? It's going to be here. It's here. It's going to stay, and I think it's going to disrupt a lot of industries, right? I think we have to embrace the technology. I've heard one of the colleagues did mention that people are not talking anymore of Gen AI. They are talking about applications of Gen AI. I think the industry is moving very fast. So if your business hasn't really thought about leveraging generative AI, I think it's high time you should start looking at it. I think that's what I want to share with you guys. I hope this was useful. Thank you.